Racism and hatred are everywhere, but what happens when one man takes a stand against it? In this story, a black man, caught in the crossfire of racist cops, shows them they picked the wrong person to mess with. Stay tuned to see what happens when these cops make the biggest mistake of their lives, because they don't realize who they're dealing with. Before we dive into the story, let me know where in the world you're watching from. Hit that like button, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more thrilling stories like this one. The sun was setting on a bustling downtown street, casting long shadows over the gathering crowd. A protest was taking shape, an angry, volatile crowd holding signs emblazoned with hateful slogans. The streets of the city were alive with shouting, and the air felt thick with tension. It wasn't the kind of protest that hoped to raise awareness or change. No, this was an explosion of anger and intolerance, racism on full display, with every chant ringing out like a venomous poison. Amidst this chaos stood Jasmine Clarke, a woman who looked as ordinary as any other. Black, with dark skin that gleamed in the late afternoon light, her expression was one of quiet determination. But beneath the surface of this composed, unassuming exterior, there was a woman forged in fire, a woman who had faced danger and come out stronger. She was an Army Ranger, a fearless soldier with years of training that had hardened her into something these protesters were not ready for. She stood near the edge of the crowd, watching as the protesters yelled at passing cars, blocking the sidewalk and waving their hateful banners. Jasmine's body language was calm, but her senses were on high alert. She knew what was happening here. This was no peaceful demonstration. These were protesters who were looking for a fight. "Look at this one," a voice sneered from the front. It was one of the protesters, a tall man with a scruffy beard and a red baseball cap that read, "Make America Great Again." His voice carried over the noise of the crowd. "What's she doing here? Does she think we want her kind around?" The man's friends laughed, a harsh sound that grated against the air. Jasmine felt the sting of their words, but she didn't flinch. She had heard worse. She had been through far worse. They didn't know what she had endured, what she had become. "Hey," one of the women shouted, stepping toward her with an exaggerated strut. "What are you doing here, huh? You want to be one of us? You're nothing but a traitor, just like the rest of them." The woman's words were venomous, each syllable a toxic dart aimed directly at Jasmine. But Jasmine remained still. She had learned long ago not to let people like this rattle her. "Just walk away," she muttered, more to herself than to the woman. She turned slightly, preparing to step around the group and move along. But as soon as she did, the woman shoved her hard in the back. "Did you hear me? I'm talking to you." The woman's voice was harsh, filled with malice. Jasmine spun around, eyes narrowing. For a moment, the world around her seemed to slow. The crowd continued to shout, but it sounded distant now. Her focus zeroed in on the woman who had dared to put her hands on her. Jasmine could feel the muscles in her legs coil, her senses sharpening. "Don't do it," she thought, but her body was already in motion. With a fluid motion, Jasmine grabbed the woman's arm as she made another attempt to push her, twisting it behind her back with a forceful precision. The woman gasped in pain, unable to free herself. "You're not dealing with someone who will back down," Jasmine said calmly, her voice a low growl that carried through the stunned silence of the crowd. The man with the red cap, seeing his friend in pain, lunged forward, trying to shove Jasmine off, but Jasmine was faster. In one quick motion, she pivoted on her heel, bringing her knee up into the man's gut. He stumbled back, gasping for air. "You think this is a joke?" Jasmine's voice rang out again, colder this time. Her military training had kicked in, and her calm demeanor was replaced by the authority of a soldier who had seen and done things far beyond the understanding of these protesters. She was no longer just a bystander. She was a force to be reckoned with. The crowd had fallen silent. The protesters around them were frozen, unsure of what to do next. Jasmine kept her eyes locked on the two aggressors, watching as the man cradled his stomach, gasping for breath, and the woman tried to wriggle out of her grip. "You want to keep going?" Jasmine asked, her voice growing colder with each word. "You're not prepared for this." The woman, now realizing who she was dealing with, stopped struggling. Sweat beaded on her forehead, and she hesitated before pulling her arm free from Jasmine's hold. As she backed away, another voice called out from the crowd. "Hey, leave her alone." A man in the crowd, a bystander who had been watching everything unfold, stepped forward. He was tall, wearing a dark jacket, and his eyes were filled with something Jasmine couldn't quite place. Concern, fear, perhaps both. But Jasmine didn't take her eyes off the two protesters in front of her. She was in control now, and she wasn't backing down. She had the experience, the skill, and the determination to stand her ground. "I'm not here to fight," Jasmine said slowly, letting go of the woman's arm. "But I won't be bullied either. You want to keep this going? You're going to have to go through me." The tension in the air was palpable. The protesters had underestimated her, thinking she was just another passive bystander, but they had no idea who they were dealing with. Jasmine's words echoed in the air as she stood her ground, the crowd around her frozen in disbelief. The once rowdy group of protesters was now eerily quiet, every one of them weighing their next move. The woman and the man who had initially targeted her were now on the defensive, realizing they had made a serious miscalculation. But Jasmine wasn't about to give them any chance to regain control. Her years of military training had conditioned her for moments like these, calm, calculated, and decisive. She stood tall, her back straight, her posture unwavering, as she watched the tension rise among the protesters. The man who had been doubled over in pain was slowly recovering, but his glare was filled with nothing but hatred. "You think you can just touch us and walk away?" he spat, wiping the blood from his lip. Jasmine didn't flinch. "I'm not here to fight. I'm here to make sure you understand something," she said, her voice steady and commanding. "You don't get to disrespect me. You don't get to bully me. And most of all, you don't get to bring your hate into my world." The crowd shifted nervously, some taking a step back, while others whispered among themselves. There was something about the way Jasmine spoke that demanded attention. She wasn't just talking to the two protesters in front of her. She was speaking to the entire group. She was sending a message that was bigger than the moment itself. "Who the hell do you think you are?" The woman, now freed from Jasmine's grip, was trembling with anger. She was trying to hold herself together, but the fear in her eyes was unmistakable. "I'm the woman you just tried to push around, and I'm done being quiet," Jasmine said, taking a step forward. Her eyes locked onto the woman's, sending a clear message that this wasn't just about her. This was about standing up to the hate that had been allowed to spread for far too long. As the tension continued to build, the man in the crowd who had spoken up earlier slowly started to make his way toward Jasmine. He was tall, well-built, and wore a determined look on his face. He approached cautiously, as though weighing his words carefully before speaking. "You don't have to do this," the man said, his voice low and firm. "You don't have to fight with them. You're better than that." Jasmine's eyes met his. For a brief moment she considered his words, but her resolve didn't waver. "I've been fighting my whole life. I don't know what it's like to just let things slide," she replied. The man took a deep breath as if he understood her, and nodded. "I get it. But you need to be careful. They'll just keep pushing back. It's better to walk away." Jasmine's gaze remained fixed on the woman and man in front of her. She could feel the heat of their anger, the intensity of their hatred, but she wasn't scared. She had nothing to fear, because she had already faced worse. She had fought against enemies who were far more dangerous than these people, enemies who didn't care about her skin color, only about the mission. "Don't worry," Jasmine said, her voice calm and unwavering. "I'm not going anywhere, and neither are you." With that, she turned back to face the group of protesters. "I'm giving you one chance," she said loudly, her voice carrying over the tense silence. "Leave, now. You've made your point, but if you keep this up, I won't hesitate to stop you." The words were like a challenge, daring them to defy her. For a long moment, the protesters exchanged uncertain glances. The energy of the crowd had shifted. What had started as an intimidating mob now seemed uncertain, on edge, unsure of how to respond. But then the woman spoke again, her voice shaking but still filled with venom. "You think we're just going to walk away?" she spat. "You think you can just stand here and intimidate us? We'll make sure you regret this." Jasmine's stance didn't change. "You're not threatening me. You're threatening everything you stand for, and I'm not backing down." The crowd remained silent for a few seconds, as if waiting for something to give. Then, the man who had been trying to hold back his anger took a step forward. He raised his hand, signaling for the others to calm down. The woman shot him a glare but stayed silent. "I don't know what you've been through," the man said, his voice slightly softer. "But this isn't the way to handle it." "I've been through more than you'll ever know," Jasmine replied, her voice steady. "And I've learned that when you're pushed too far, you have to stand up for yourself. You can't let people walk all over you." For the first time, the man hesitated. He looked at the other protesters who were slowly starting to disperse. Jasmine's presence had already begun to shift the mood. Some were backing off, clearly unwilling to escalate the situation further. Jasmine took a step back, surveying the group one final time. "I didn't come here to fight you, but I won't let you keep pushing people around." The woman and man looked at each other, both of them silent, as if considering their next move. It was clear they were no longer sure of themselves. Jasmine turned to walk away, her eyes scanning the remaining protesters. "If any of you have something to say, come forward, otherwise stay out of my way." The stillness of the retreating protesters left a heavy silence in its wake. The anger that had surged through the crowd moments before had now turned to hesitation, and Jasmine, standing strong in the center, knew this was her moment. She had not only faced down their threats, but she had also turned the tables with nothing but her courage and the calm discipline of her training. The protesters' footsteps faded into the distance, but Jasmine stood still, her mind working through the possibilities. This wasn't just a small victory for herself, it was a message to everyone watching. It was a message about strength in the face of hatred, resilience in the face of injustice, and most importantly, standing up to tyranny when others cower. "Are you okay?" The voice came from behind her, a soft but steady question. Jasmine turned to find the young man she had spoken to earlier. He was still standing there, eyes wide with awe and respect. He had witnessed the entire scene, from the tension to the sudden quiet, when the protesters realized they were facing someone far stronger than they had anticipated. "I'm fine," she said, giving him a reassuring smile, "but thank you for asking." "You're a hero to us," he added, his voice filled with admiration. "What you did out there, it was amazing. You didn't back down." Jasmine shook her head slightly. "No, I didn't back down because I've seen this kind of hatred before. I've been trained to deal with it, but more importantly, I've learned to stand my ground." She paused, her eyes scanning the now empty street where the protesters had been just moments ago. "It's about doing what's right, no matter how scary or difficult it might be." The young man seemed to take her words to heart. He looked around, as if trying to fully process what had just happened. "Do you think things will change?" he asked. Jasmine glanced at the empty space where the protesters had stood, and then back at him. "Change takes time. But moments like these help. You see, the people who tried to intimidate us, they were expecting fear. They were expecting submission. But we gave them something else, strength." His eyes widened slightly. "You mean, we can stand up to them?" "Exactly," she said. "We just have to remember that we're not alone. We have each other." Just as she finished speaking, a couple of police officers approached, their hands raised in a gesture of peace. They were members of the local police force, who had been stationed nearby when the protest had escalated. They had witnessed everything from a distance but had not intervened until the scene had calmed. "Agent Clarke," one of them said, nodding respectfully, "we've got the situation under control now. We're going to make sure the protesters leave the area peacefully." Jasmine nodded but didn't say anything. Her mind was still processing what had just happened. It wasn't just about stopping the protest, it was about showing that there were people out there who would stand up for what was right, no matter the odds. "Thanks," she finally said, breaking the silence. "But don't let this be forgotten. People need to know this isn't just about this one protest, it's about a bigger fight, a fight against hate. And this city needs to be reminded of that." The officer gave her a stern but appreciative look. "We hear you, ma'am. We'll make sure it's handled correctly." With that, the officers moved to gather the remaining bystanders, helping to clear the area. Jasmine, however, wasn't finished. She turned to the young man who was still standing there, trying to make sense of what he had just witnessed. "I know this wasn't easy to watch," Jasmine said, her voice softening. "But now you know that no matter how difficult things get, there's always a way to stand your ground." The young man nodded. "I won't forget this. I won't forget what you did." Jasmine smiled warmly at him. "That's what it's all about. It's about inspiring others to find their own strength, even when they're scared." As the last of the protesters were led away by the police, Jasmine finally allowed herself to breathe. She had faced their hatred, stood tall in the face of threats, and not only survived but made a difference. She had sent a message that would resonate long after the crowd had dispersed, and she was just getting started. The evening sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, casting a golden hue over the street. The confrontation had ended, but Jasmine knew that the fight was far from over. She could feel the lingering tension in the air, thick with the weight of what had just transpired. But she was not one to back down, and she could tell that this moment was just the beginning of something bigger. The protesters were gone, but their hateful words still echoed in Jasmine's mind. It wasn't just their venom that disturbed her, it was the realization that, despite the victory, the system that allowed people like them to thrive had not changed. One act of resistance wasn't enough to dismantle decades of systemic injustice, but it was a start. As the remaining bystanders slowly trickled out of the scene, Jasmine walked back to her truck. Her military dogs, having completed their role, hopped into the back, their presence still a comfort. She didn't speak to them. There was no need. They had done their job flawlessly, and Jasmine was proud of them. But as she reached for the truck door, she noticed something unusual. A man dressed in a worn-out hoodie and jeans was sitting on the curb nearby, his head lowered. His body language screamed defeat, and Jasmine's instincts kicked in. She knew the look. He was lost in thought, likely consumed by the weight of everything he had just witnessed. She approached him slowly, giving him space but making her presence known. He didn't look up, but she could see his shoulders shaking. The man was crying. "Hey," Jasmine said softly, sitting down beside him. "Are you all right?" The man sniffed and wiped his eyes, but he didn't respond. Jasmine could tell he was struggling with something, maybe guilt, maybe confusion. The events of the day had clearly hit him hard, but Jasmine knew something needed to be said. People couldn't just stay silent when they saw things that weren't right. "I saw you in the crowd earlier," Jasmine continued. "I saw how you looked at me when I stood up to them. You wanted to speak up, didn't you? You wanted to do something." The man slowly turned to face her, his eyes red from crying. "I didn't know what to do. I didn't know if it was my place." Jasmine nodded, understanding more than he knew. It's always hard to speak up, especially when you don't know if anyone else is willing to stand with you. But that's the thing, you're not alone. We're all in this together. One voice might not be enough, but when it's joined by others, that's when real change happens. The man took a shaky breath, his voice barely audible. "I don't want to live in a world like this. I don't want to be afraid to speak my truth." Jasmine's heart softened as she placed a hand on his shoulder. "Then don't be afraid anymore. You can make a difference too. We all can." They sat there for a few minutes in silence, the hum of the city around them now fading into the background. It wasn't a magical fix to his problems, but in that moment, Jasmine knew that just by talking to him, she had given him the strength to start thinking differently. Sometimes, change didn't come with a loud explosion. It came quietly, through small, meaningful conversations. As she stood to leave, the man looked up at her. "Thank you," he whispered. Jasmine smiled, her eyes filled with quiet determination. "No problem. Just remember, you've got a voice. Don't let anyone take it from you." As she drove away, Jasmine couldn't shake the feeling that this was just one of many small steps she needed to take. Today's victory was personal, but it was also a victory for everyone who had been silenced. It was a reminder that when one person stands up, they don't just fight for themselves, they fight for the community around them too. And that, Jasmine realized, was the key to true change. Jasmine's mind raced as she drove through the city streets. The adrenaline from the confrontation was beginning to fade, but the weight of what had happened still clung to her like a heavy cloak. The image of the protesters, their faces twisted in hatred, flashed in her mind. But now, she also saw the faces of the people who had witnessed her stand up, people who were inspired, people who were starting to find their own voices. She thought about the young man she'd spoken to, the one who had been on the edge of speaking up, but had been too afraid. Now he had a spark of resolve in his eyes. Jasmine had done more than just stop a protest. She had lit a fire in the hearts of those who watched. They had seen her stand up and confront hate, head on, and in doing so she had shown them that they too had the power to resist, to rise above the toxicity that had been poisoning their world. But it wasn't over, far from it. Jasmine pulled into her driveway, the familiar sound of her car's engine cutting off as she parked. The neighborhood around her was quiet, a stark contrast to the chaos she'd just left behind. She sat in the car for a moment, her hands gripping the steering wheel as she took a deep breath. She wasn't done yet. This fight was bigger than one incident. This was about dismantling the system that allowed hatred to thrive. As she walked to her front door, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, expecting a message from one of her colleagues, or perhaps an update on the ongoing investigation into the protest. But when she saw the notification, her heart skipped a beat. It was a message from a contact in the Department of Justice. "We need you. It's time to take the next step." Jasmine's pulse quickened. The message was short, but it was enough to tell her everything she needed to know. The fight she had started wasn't just a small one. It was about to escalate to something bigger. The system was watching, and they knew she had the strength to lead the charge. Jasmine immediately dialed the number on the message. "Agent Clarke," a voice answered on the other end. "We need you to come in. The department's ready to take action. We've got your back." She nodded, her jaw clenched with determination. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. As she set the phone down and grabbed her coat, she couldn't help but feel a sense of resolve. This wasn't just about stopping a protest or confronting a few racist individuals. This was about bringing change to an entire system that had allowed people like the ones she faced earlier to thrive. This was about dismantling the infrastructure that perpetuated hate. When Jasmine arrived at the Department of Justice, she was greeted by her colleagues, who had gathered in a meeting room. The room was tense, but there was a palpable sense of urgency in the air. They were all here because they knew that things had gone too far. The corruption, the systemic racism, it was something that had been allowed to fester for too long. But now, they were ready to take action. Jasmine took a seat at the table, her colleagues' eyes on her, waiting for her input. She had been at the forefront of this fight, and they knew that her experience and leadership would be crucial. "We've got the evidence," one of the attorneys said, sliding a folder across the table. "Everything we need to make a case. It's time to go public." Jasmine opened the folder, scanning the documents inside. It was more than just the footage from the protest. It was a comprehensive list of complaints, investigations, and evidence that had been collected over the years. It was enough to bring down entire departments, to expose the corruption that had been running unchecked for far too long. "This is it," Jasmine said, her voice steady. "We can bring them down. We can make sure this doesn't happen again." The room fell silent, the weight of the moment settling in. The fight was no longer just about one protest. It was about changing the system, about holding those in power accountable for their actions, and they were ready to fight for that change. By the time Jasmine left the department that night, the wheels were already in motion. The media had been notified, the investigations had been set in motion, and the authorities were ready to act. The story of what happened that day was going to spread far and wide, and Jasmine knew that the world was watching. She stood outside the building for a moment, looking up at the night sky. The lights of the city twinkled below her, but the real change was happening in the hearts of the people who had witnessed her stand up to hate. They had seen that one person could make a difference, and they had seen that standing up to injustice wasn't just possible, it was necessary. As she made her way home, Jasmine couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. The fight was far from over, but the wheels had already been set in motion, and she knew that, with each step forward, they were getting closer to the world they all deserved.